Welcome back, everybody. The next two sections, we're going to talk about a very specific type of relation, and it is called a function. All right, so this particular section, 1.4, all right, is going to be focus on function notation. I'm going to show you basically what a function is. We're going to do a variety of different representations of different functions in the hope that we bring some understanding. All right. So every function has a few essential pieces. All right. The first piece is called the domain. The second essential piece is called the range. All right. And every x in your domain goes to a y in your range. So each one maps to a y, kind of like that. Now, the domain and range are connected by something we call a rule. All right, and that rule tells each element in the domain which element in the range that they map to. So, for example, a rule could look like this. Now, f of x means a function with variable x. So anytime you see f of x, it is indeed a function. So here's my rule, 3x plus 4. All right. So let's look a little deeper before we start talking about domain range. All right. So f of x is the equivalent of y. So if I probably have seen it like this, 3x plus 4, and either f of x or y, doesn't matter, all right, is a variable, and the x is a variable. X is called your independent variable. And the reason it's called your independent variable is because you can choose any element in the domain for x, and that's okay. Now, once you pick an element for x, for example, let's say I pick 4, right? Then y could only be one very specific thing. So if I pick 4, 4 times 3 is 12, plus 4 is 16, so y has to be 16, all right? So we call this a dependent variable. Because y is dependent on whatever you pick for x. I could pick a different element for x. Y is going to be something different. All right. So let's try a quick example. So here's my rule. F of x equals 3x squared plus 4x plus 2. So let's say for x, I said x now equals 2. Let's say I picked 2 for x. Now, so I want to take 2, and every time I see an x, I want to plug in 2. So really what I want to know is, what is f of 2? Now, the x's over here are kind of like placeholders. I use parentheses to represent the x in your rule because you could put anything you want in there. You could put in a number, you could put in a letter, you could put in a letter plus a number. There's a whole wide variety of things you can do. It just gets a little bit confusing, all right, because I have like x and x, so I kind of think of them as parentheses. Now, what am I going to plug in? Every time I saw an x, I told you I was going to plug in a 2. All right, so 2 squared is 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 2 is 8 plus 2. And the whole thing equals 22. So that's what the value of y is. All right, so let's try another rule. Try another example. What if I said f of x equals negative x squared plus 3? and I said I want to know what is f of x when x equals -1. All right? So really what I want to know is what is f of -1? So I'm going to put my negative on the outside, and remember my x is just a parenthesis. So what am I going to put in that parenthesis? -1. And put the plus 3. So -1 squared is +1 times the extra negative gets me to -1. I still have the plus 3 and it equals 2. All right, so I'm going to use the same rule and I'm going to say, let's find f of 2. I'm going to ask you now at this point to pause the video. Why don't you run f of 2 quickly through, and we'll talk about the answer on the back end. All right, hopefully you plugged in -2. So again, I'm going to set it up the same way. I'm going to rewrite my rule. Just instead of writing x, I'm just simply going to write a parenthesis. And then what am I going to put in that parenthesis? I'm going to put the same thing that I put in this one. Just a plain old 2. So 2 squared is 4 times -1 gives me -4. Then I'm going to add the 3 and I get -1. All right, so let's step it up a notch and do a slightly more complicated example. So I'm going to give a rule. My new rule is going to be f of x equals x squared plus x plus 3. And I'm going to say I want to know what f of x plus 3 equals. All right. So the first thing I want to do is I want to rewrite my rule. All right. And I'm going to rewrite my rule, except I'm not writing x. Again, I'm writing parentheses. All right. The idea of just writing your rule as parentheses, I think, is going to help a lot of people that have trouble with this kind of thing in the past. So the only question is, right, here I had x, and here I had x, right? But here inside the parentheses I have x plus 3. So what am I going to put inside these two parentheses? I'm going to put in x plus 3 and x plus 3. Now the only thing left to do here is to simplify what you have. And again, that's another thing that is key to this whole problem. This will get you partial credit, but if you don't simplify correctly, you can't get full credit. So I'm going to ask you at this point to pause the video and try to work on the simplifying, see how far down you can get it, and we'll talk about the answer on the back end. All right, hopefully you did some simplification. Now the key is here, this x plus 3, the whole thing squared, right, is x plus 3. Oh, that's a terrible 3. I'm going to make that one better. Make that x better even too. All right, now these first two things have to be multiplied. All right, so we're following the order of operations. We're starting with our first term, and our first term had our squared. So we got to deal with that first. The way we dealt with it was saying that squared means this number times itself. And now we have to multiply those two things out. So when you multiply those things out, it's x squared plus 6x plus 9 plus x plus 3 plus 3. These parentheses can be dropped because they're all pluses. There's no multiplication that has to be done. And now we can focus on combining like terms. So I have x squared. I have a 6x plus x, which is plus 7x. And then I have a 9 a 3 and a 3. So 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 plus 9 is 15. All right. So let's try one more. I'm going to give a slightly smaller rule, or actually, you know what? We can use the same rule. Might be good to use the same rule. So I have f of x equals x squared plus x plus 3. And I want to now know f of x plus h. All right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm simply going to rewrite my rule with parentheses instead of x, because whatever goes in this parenthesis has to go here and here. So whatever goes in this parenthesis, x plus h, has to go here and here. All right? So now we got to do the algebra to simplify. So if you want, why don't you pause the video? And the algebra is going to be fairly similar to before, except it's an h instead of a 3. And we'll talk about the answer on the back end. All right. So hopefully you paused the video and did some work. I do like writing out all the steps, especially when you're starting out. One of the things that I think students get tripped up on is they try to do a lot of the math in their head in an effort to save time. But what's the use in saving time if you're going to make errors that you could help if you had just written it out? So I would probably write this out quite often until you are really that comfortable. X times x is x squared. It's plus 2xh plus h squared plus x plus h plus 3. And then I'm looking quickly at this and I'm saying I have no like terms here. X squared x, not like terms. I have h squared h, they're not like terms. And 2xh, there's no xh's anywhere else. So this is where I would end. All right. Now, one other type of function that we have is called a piecewise function. All right. And a piecewise function looks something like this. All right. And then they have this nice squiggly bracket that I can never draw. And something like x squared if x is less than or equal to -1, and 2x if x is greater than -1. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Now basically what the piecewise function means is that all these numbers are in our domain, but if the number is less than -1, we've got to use this rule, and if the number is greater than -1, like if it's 5 or 12 or something like that, you got to use this rule. Now this is a fairly small piecewise function, just one to start you out with, and but I do want to ask you to try a couple things out. I want you to find f of -2 and f of 3. So pause the video real quick. Find f of -2, find f of 3. Come on back and we'll check the answers on the back end. All right, so f of -2 is less, well, -2 is less than -1, so we're going to use this rule. So that's pretty much it. And -2 squared is +4. Now for f of 3, right? 3 is greater than -1, so we have to use this rule. So 2 times 3 equals 6. All right, so piecewise functions are going to get a little bit more complicated. They could have 3 rules, and not 2. And the rules could be more difficult. This is just a way to kind of start you out, get you a feel for it, and we'll see where we go from here. All right, guys, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next time.